I dropped the hammer on those reveals in book one. Because what I found was when I started writing an epilogue, it became this long discussion, and I realized, no, these are conversations that are going to carry through for at least the two next books, if not further into the series. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Patricia Meredith and I am the author of the Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries, which are set in 1901. Now, this following video is going to be a little bit of a spoiler, so I would encourage you to not watch it until you have finished book one in the series. Now, book one in my series is Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker, and even if you have not read book two or book three yet, it's okay, as long as you have finished book one. I'm going to attempt to talk about a subject that is revealed in book one that carries through to book two and three without giving away anything that happens outside of that topic. So if you're an avid mystery reader and you don't want any spoilers about the ending of book one, I highly recommend that you not watch right now, that you wait and you come back to this video. I would absolutely encourage you to bookmark this though, so you can come back and watch it after you have completed reading book one, because it really is a worthwhile topic to delve into. While you're considering whether to turn me off now and go watch something else or to continue, I do want to take a minute to give a disclaimer to say that I am an author. I am not a doctor. I do not experience any mental health at this point in my life, and therefore I am just proof that an author should not write what you know, but write what you want to know. Research these days can help you a lot in delving into something outside of your actual experience. And let's be honest, no matter what kind of book you're writing, you're going to be writing about some character who is experiencing something outside of what you actually have experienced, right? I'm not going to write all books about a mom in 2023. Instead, I'm going to delve into different time periods. And one of the beauties of historical fiction is reminding us that throughout history, things repeat themselves. There is nothing new under the sun, and we can learn from history very easily if we just take the time to look back. So, that being said, I am not a doctor, so anything that I say here is totally based on my research and with interviewing people who actually do experience this. So today I'll be talking about mental health in the Gilded Age. Now, I actually just talked about this subject in a live interview last weekend with Tori Talks, and that link is down below if you would like to check out that interview. I highly recommend that you do. We covered a lot of topics, and it was a pretty long interview, and it wasn't until the second half that we got into the spoiler part. So even if you haven't read all of the books, you'll learn a lot about the writing and the history that goes into it, and just a lot of really fun topics that we got to touch on during that interview. And then in the second half, we dove into this topic a little bit. So, for those of you who have read Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker, you know that Eleanor suffers from DID, which is dissociative identity disorder. Now, even though we call it that today, it was not called that in 1901. And as you delve into the story and unpack my storyline that I've written through the first three books, you will see that I am trying really hard to maintain a historical outlook through the points of view of my characters and have them each reflect a different knowledge and understanding of what is going on. Because basically, none of them understand what is going on. And that reflects true to history at that time. They didn't understand what DID, or at that time it was called multiple personalities, or dual consciousness. They didn't understand what it was. In fact, it was often placed with hysteria, right? Hysteria was the word that covered any time a woman did anything out of the norm. It was used for the monthly cycle. It was used for my wife isn't listening to me at home. It was my wife doesn't want to have kids. Anything that was considered against the norm they would label a woman as hysterical or suffering from hysteria. But when it comes to the first book, I intentionally decided to drop the hammer. What I mean by that is I reveal that Eleanor and the baker are the murderer. Now, I don't go into any discussion past that, but I tried to give an inkling to the reader of the way I'm going to be approaching this in the rest of the books with Marion's final line. Innocence is a matter of perspective. Now, one may argue that that is totally incorrect. However, what I'm trying to put into your mind as the reader is that there's a lot more to unpack here than you think at first. Now, unfortunately, in movies and books, the DID has gotten something of a reputation. It is usually used to drop that hammer. It is usually used as a final twist in a mystery. Oh my goodness, they have multiple personalities, and obviously one of them is a murderer. Now, this is a very terrible thing that has been repeated over and over in literature and movies. And I chose to drop it there at the end of book 1 because I am hoping that people will be intrigued enough, especially with Marion's last comment, to continue with me on this journey. Through these first 3 books, we're going to unpack a lot about what they believed about multiple personalities at that time. And it's very difficult. It's taken a lot of research and time on my part because I want to make sure that it is respectful and sensitive and an accurate representation while also maintaining historical accuracy. So like I said, at this time, people were unaware, not just people, doctors were unaware of this phenomenon of DID. They didn't know what to think of it. The only thing that in 1901 they might have had to compare it to would be, unfortunately, the story of Jekyll and Hyde. And if you're interested in learning more about that and hearing how the book is actually not about DID at all, it's actually a philosophical dissertation on the duality of man. Like many horror stories at that time, it's actually questioning our humanity and asking some really tough questions. But if you're interested in hearing more about that, next Saturday, I will be going live with 3 other lovely ladies here on BookTube to discuss our buddy read of Jekyll and Hyde. So I highly recommend that you tune in for that. I will be joined by Tori Talks, She Was Only Evie, and Kay's Hidden Shelf. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion because I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion. So I hope you'll join me for that. So as I was saying, unfortunately, that was one of the only comparisons they would have had at that time. So I purposely have my characters in book 2 discussing a reading of that and then talking about how it is different than what they are actually seeing in Eleanor. Now, one of the things that has always fascinated me is how I believe we all wear masks. We all act different ways around different people, right? And that is a theme that is carried through all of my books in the Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries. You especially see it in each of the characters. So, for example, we've got Bernard, my lead detective, and he's suffering from imposter syndrome because he's a detective. But is he? Oh my goodness, he hasn't solved a murder, and does he really deserve this? Is he really as good as, the dream of being like Sherlock Holmes? All of that. Then we have his twin brother, who is suffering from kind of a twin syndrome, where a lot of twins that I have known growing up hate being referred to as the twins because they are each unique individuals with very different life experiences. And so to constantly refer to them as one entity is a little bit irritating. And so in Thomas, we have that, and we also have kind of this feeling that Bernard is the older brother, even though they're twins, and so he seems more successful in this 1901 environment. He's got a great job, he's married, all of these things, and Thomas isn't. And then we've got Archie, who has moved to a new location, and he's a clockmaker, but he's kind of got this chance to redefine himself in a new environment, and basically he's doing that through his sound theory. And so he acts a little bit differently around certain people based on what they expect of him. And then we've got Marion. So here we get into the really interesting ones. We've got Marion, who actually does have an alternate identity. So like I said, we're going to spoil some things from the first book. So hopefully my saying that hasn't ruined it for you. And you turn this off before you heard that if you haven't read book 1. So in book 1, we find out that Marion is also the Red Rogue. So she lives a alternate life as a thief. Now, it was very important that Marion has that background because her rediscovered best friend, mother, who basically helped raise her, Eleanor, is also suffering from an alternate identity. But is it really also? It's not also, because it's very, very different. What Eleanor is experiencing with her mental health, with multiple personalities, is very different from what Marion is experiencing in her choice to be a thief. So like I said, I dropped the hammer on those reveals in book 1 because what I found was when I started writing an epilogue, it became this long discussion between Marion and Eleanor and trying to figure out what is this thing, and they didn't have the resources available. And I realized, no, these are conversations that are going to carry through for at least the 2 next books, if not further into the series. And it's going to keep continuing. I needed to give my characters space and my readers space to really encourage that discussion, because it's a really worthwhile discussion to look at what did they know in history at this time about multiple personalities, and how would each of these characters perceive what Eleanor is going through compared to their own struggles. So obviously, I needed to do a lot of research in order to prepare for this character and then go deeper in with her in book 2 and book 3. And it took a lot of time and effort to find these articles. And what I found was really eye-opening. And so if you head to my website, the link will be below, I wrote an article before the publication of book 3, giving links to all of the articles that were mentioned by Rosalind in book 2, Cupboards All Bared. And so if you head to that, that will have all of the links that you need if you want to look deeper and read all of these articles that I'm going to mention that I found for my characters to reference pre-1901. Now, the first article that I came across was doing a search of what would have been available for Washington people in particular. And what I found was an article in the Pullman Herald, which was published in 1893, April 7th, 1893. And the title of it was Dual Personality, Residual Phenomena of the Mind in Sane People. Now, yes, it uses the word dual personality, but here's the thing. What they do is they compare it to sleepwalking or the distracted state of the average creative type. That's what the whole article is about. It has nothing to do with dual personality or multiple personalities or DID. And that was the only thing I could find that was even remotely related. So once I knew that, I knew that I was going to have to go even deeper. Now, eventually I found some articles, and you're going to see very quickly that they are in French. So, the articles prior to 1901 that were relevant and capable of being read by my characters required that somebody in my cast of characters be able to understand French. So, enter Rosalind. Now, Rosalind Carew has become one of my absolute favorite characters to write, and it probably has a lot to do with the fact that she reflects me in a lot of ways. She loves research, she loves reading, and what I set up through Rosalind is that she has come to a point where she no longer is interested in reading fiction. She wants to read more about science. She wants to learn so much. And since she is in a wheelchair and by no means disabled, she lives a very full life. And in fact, that's another carry through in all 3 of my books, is I try to reflect the fact that people that might be considered disabled are by no means so. I have a blind blacksmith who lives a very full life. I have a woman in a wheelchair who's incredibly intelligent and learns so much and is basically the research assistant for all of my characters and the profound mind behind a lot of the discussions, the really deep ones that happen in my series. And then I have Eleanor, and we'll get more into her here in a second. So in Rosalind, I have a character who has been able to learn French so that way she can read these articles that I found that are in the original French. And it was very necessary because the research is there, but it wasn't really prevalent in America. Now, the best way to show this is to read you the scene in Cupboards All Bared. So in Cupboards All Bared, which is book 2, I promise I'm not going to read anything that's going to reveal anything. If anything, it should whet your appetite and make you interested in reading the rest of this book because, like I said, there's a lot of discussion of Eleanor and what she's experiencing and what we can learn from that on a historical level in their discussions together. So here we go. Rosalind shuffled the articles before her. She'd taken it upon herself to learn more about the psychology behind the Eleanor Baker dilemma. It was clear neither Marion, Bernard, nor Thomas knew what to make of the whole thing, and so for the past month she'd been combing through every old and new edition of her favorite magazines, searching for something helpful. She may be confined to a chair, but that didn't mean she couldn't help in that one particular gift of hers, researching. Her fascination with all things medical and scientific was finally going to pay off and prove that she had a lot to offer in assisting her detective husband. What she'd learned was far more enlightening than she'd imagined, however. She'd finally found what she wanted in an older edition of the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, a collection of them having been donated to her by someone in the church who thought she might find them interesting. The article was about a young French woman named Phillida, entitled, and I'm going to butcher this because I don't speak French, Amnésique périodique ou de doublement de la vie. It had been translated into English from the Revue Scientifique and published back in 1876 by a Dr. Azam. Please note the date. It was published originally in 1876. So the French had been studying this for a lot longer than the Americans had. In fact, it's even further back, as we'll find out here in a second. And if you're interested in reading this original article, this is one of the ones that is linked in my blog. So I definitely recommend that you read it, but for now I'm going to give you a brief summary in my book. Phillida was described as an intelligent, ordinary young lady who occasionally suffered from intense headaches and a form of hysteria. Like I said, hysteria. Then in 1858, so again, it's even further back that they had begun studying Phillida. In 1858, she began showing far more worrying symptoms, including falling into a sleep state from which she'd awake with a personality very different from her normal one. And now I'm going to quote directly from the article. Her character is completely changed. Formerly melancholy, she has become cheerful, even gay, her vivacity something even bordering on wildness. Her imagination is very vivid. From the slightest cause, she is overcome with emotions of sadness or joy. Instead of being indifferent to everything, as she was, she has become sensitive in the extreme. In this condition, she remembers perfectly all that has passed during similar preceding states, and also during her normal life. Phillida remembers not only that which has taken place during previous attacks, but also during her entire normal life. Whereas, during her normal life, she has no recollection of that which took place during the attacks. Some minutes before, she sings a romantic song, and if we ask her to repeat it, she does not know what we are talking about. They speak to her about a visitor whom she has just received, but she has seen no one. The forgetfulness relates only to those things which transpired during the second condition. Every general idea acquired prior to this is unaffected. She knows perfectly well how to read, write, and keep accounts, cut out work, sew, and 1,000 other things. So now we jump back into Rosalind. Once Rosalind realized she might need to be looking in the French magazines rather than the English, she was pleased to find a second article. Again, forgive me. Un cas de doublement de la personnalité période en amnésique d'une aînée chez un homme. And this is found in the Annales médico-psychologiques and authored by Dr. Camusset. It took a little more time, as it required she translated the French to English on her own. According to Camusset's article, his patient, Vivette, also existed in a primary and secondary state. Strangely enough, Vivette was even paralyzed in one state and fully capable of walking in the other. Also, like Phillida, Vivette was able to recall everything when in one state, but suffered from amnesia when in the other. Rosalind finally set down the articles, tapping her fingers upon them as she gazed at nothing, thinking about what she'd just read. From what Bernard and Marion had told her, it seemed to Rosalind that it was very likely there were certain similarities between Eleanor's case and those of poor Velida and Vivette. If the baker only appeared to defend Eleanor to help her do what was necessary, to remove the terrible husbands in her life, then it made much more sense for the baker to be secondary and Eleanor to be primary. But if Eleanor could not remember becoming the baker, then that meant that her baker side most likely could remember everything, which made Eleanor a secondary state and the baker her primary state, something too horrifying to maintain. Rosalind bit at her lip, avoiding looking at Marion, who was reading beside her, as she wasn't ready yet to present these new ideas to her companion. She'd need to make a list of questions for Bernard to ask Eleanor the next time he interviewed her. It was possible that he might be able to teach the attending physicians a thing or two when it came down to it, as the likelihood of local psychologists being familiar with anything remotely similar to this was highly doubtful. At least she was finally getting somewhere with her research. If Eleanor really did suffer from this double consciousness, she stood a very good chance of ending up in medical-like asylum, which, although not good, was far better than ending up at the end of a hangman's noose. So that is our introduction to that. And like I said, you can find all of those articles online. I highly recommend that you check out those articles yourself and take a deeper look at it. If you stumble across the Wikipedia articles that reference both of these people from history, Vivette and Velida, I encourage you to, instead of reading what is written there, to jump to the referenced articles at the bottom so that you can read the actual accounts. And that is only one of the conversations included in this book. Later, we go into greater depth with Marion. Rosalind and Marion have this great discussion talking about what is going on here, and Marion can kind of reflect in her head about how is this similar to what she experiences with her alternate identity. The answer is no, absolutely not. It's very, very different because Marion has chosen her alternate identity and Eleanor has not. Like I said, all three of these books really examine this topic, and I encourage you to read all of them so you can go along with me and the characters as we peel back the layers of what historically they knew about mental health in the Gilded Age. Thank you so much for delving with me further into this topic. I know it's a hard one. It's a very difficult one to grasp for those of us who do not experience DID or suffer from any mental health. And all I can say is that I am very grateful for the research that is out there, for the nurses who I spoke with about this disorder and who answered all of my questions, and also for the person who opened her heart and mind to me in reading my books and telling me about her own personal struggles with DID. If you have any questions for me about this topic, please do remember that I am an author, that I have researched, that I have no personal experience with this. And so feel free to leave me comments and reactions below, but I encourage you to read my books, see what has come of this research, how I have tried to create living, breathing human beings who are experiencing something that is outside my own experience. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. I post a new video every Saturday and go live every last Saturday of the month. Thanks for joining me.